something that was brought up, some things that are, this is said quite often, that coaches are just overrated. I've heard Pate talk about this, and his big take is no, coaches are properly rated. You just kind of like, they're not elite, right? So let's talk about some coaches here. I've got three, and then maybe we'll dive into a fourth one that I kind of thought of as we were doing this. And if you guys have other guys that we'll add into this as well, I'm for it. But James Franklin on this list, consistently talked about as overrated. Brian Kelly certainly is one. Lincoln Riley, that might be one that we maybe have differing takes on too. But thoughts on, we can start with James Franklin. We can go into Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley. Tom, I'll let you start it off just because Franklin being the first one and you being the Penn State guy. But let's talk some thoughts around, are these guys all overrated?
I think you have to define what you mean by overrated in order to have this conversation. Is like, are we talking about ring chasing? Like, can we exclude Ryan Day from this conversation because he just won a national championship? Can we practically say that Ryan Day wasn't the big driving force, lone reason why Ohio State just won a national championship? Like, are we being reasonable in that respect? Is it about how many titles you won? Like, I get that. James Franklin inherited a team that was nearly on its deathbed. Let's not forget about Penn State under sanctions. You had walk-ons, guys off the street playing Big Ten football. So he had to take that and he had to actually compete. And within 2-3 years, 2016 won the Big Ten championship. Now, granted, you got a generational talent in Saquon Barkley. You flipped him from Rutgers, which is just an unbelievable situation. But still, you were able to turn that around really quickly. Okay. Someone who knows Penn State intimately, that is a school historically that believes in success with honor, meaning we're not going to pay a whole lot. We're going to play money ball, and you should just want to come here and be a part of this brand. A lot of schools have experienced that for a number of years. The gut job that James Franklin has had to do to get Penn State to this point has been monumental. So when you say overrated, it's like, okay, what are we really talking about? Are we saying James Franklin and him coming up short in the big games against the top 5, top 10, top 15? Yeah, I'd be the first person to say that those have been extremely disappointing. I've attended a lot of them, but at the same time, the job that he's done has been gargantuan. Brian Kelly at Notre Dame never struggled for resources. Lost LSU. Has he struggled for resources whatsoever? Lincoln Riley, you were at Oklahoma. You did not have to do a rebuild. You went to USC. It looked like you were going to be just fine, inheriting Caleb Williams, all these sorts of things. I think you could also throw Mario Cristobal in there as somebody who got some buzz with Oregon, then went off to Miami. And yes, I'm seeing everybody in the chat, and I apologize. They've done a great job in recruiting the last few years, but I think Carson Beck is going to be a flop. How's your ROI for $4 million and a dude who gets anxiety from watching football? Best of luck to you. I think Mario Cristobal is also on this list. But again, when you're talking about overrated, it's like, what are we really discussing? Is it how many championships they've won? Because maybe you could throw Steve Sarkisian in that mix. I think some people would think that's sacrilege, but how many big time programs has he gone to and gotten great opportunities and screwed up in the past? Is Lane Kiffin overrated? All the money they're throwing around at Ole Miss, and he's complaining on social media. Like, the argument needs to be framed, in my opinion.
Yeah, before Cole goes, I think when people say overrated, they're just saying they're not elite, right? Maybe that's
which is fine, but and then okay, so not elite. What does that mean?
Right.
Does that mean he's not an elite in-game tactician? Does that mean he's not an elite CEO of his program? Because then you're having multiple conversations. Dabo Swinney, I would never call a great in-game tactician, the likes of Nick Saban, but he is obviously a great CEO of his program. The same thing for James Franklin. Great CEO, in-game tactician, I wouldn't put him in that category. So again, it's just, you need bumpers for this sort of conversation.
Yeah, they're essentially like James Franklin and Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley may be on the fringe of being outside of this, but the top two that we mentioned, James Franklin, Brian Kelly, and Brian Kelly's had some stinkers too, where he's lost some games he shouldn't have. Every coach does. I think when people say overrated, I think they're just saying these coaches aren't beating the coaches that are a tier above them, right? Like, which is that really being overrated? Or is that, a guy loses in a one-on-one game to LeBron. Yeah, you lost to LeBron, but you beat the other 90 the other 90 players in the league or whatever. So that doesn't make you overrated to be a tier below. Cole, what are your thoughts?
I want you to tell me what is your criteria for rankings in college football coaches. And then if you're going to say championships, then remind yourself that number one on the list is Kirby Smart. Number two on the list is Dabo Sweeney, because that's your criteria,
Mhm.
championship. And number three is Ryan Day. And that's the list. Those
Yeah.
are the only active coaches currently in college football that can claim a national title. We just saw one depart at North Carolina with Mac Brown's dismissal, and all it is replaced him with Ryan frickin' Day, a dude who also for the last 5 years has been able to get to 11 plus wins, beat up on Penn State, not beat Michigan, but still be in the running for a college football playoff spot, and yet he is overrated. What type of tomfoolery are we living in where you honestly think that a coach that constantly is getting to top 10 wins in college football, finding ways to be ranked inside the AP in college football top 15 yearly, finishing in the top half of their recruiting cycle in their conference in five-star talents. They're making sure they're bringing in the right cultures in the transfer portal. They're constantly putting themselves in prime position to at least compete for a college football playoff spot. Do people not understand that 10 wins in college football, regardless of what conference you're in, regardless of what your schedule looks like, is daunting in itself? Because some teams, they don't have a bye week for the first 6 weeks. Injuries start to stockpile up. You start losing talent. You have to be able to stockpile names that may only be utilized on 30% of snaps. So Brian Kelly is not an overrated head coach. Do I think that he's no longer a top 5 head coach in college football? I'd go on that, especially with his underwhelmingness during his tenure in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But that doesn't mean that he's not a top 10 head coach. And the same thing goes for James Franklin. 6 years of 10 plus wins. And in any other college football playoff format over the last decade, Penn State would be the fifth most represented team in terms of appearances in the college football playoff. It's a struggle that, unfortunately, every single year they had to face off against Michigan, who won a national title, and Ohio State, who's won a national title. Those are two coaches that constantly put their teams in positions to get to double digit wins, put their teams in positions to compete alongside some of the best in college football, put themselves in positions to find their season ranked with a number attached to their name, and certainly now in a 12-team playoff era, be a constant force in the postseason. You talked about a guy like Mario Cristobal being a name. What about Hugh Freeze? Freeze has
Agreed.
been living off of 2 back-to-back wins against Nick Saban. You want to know who else had 2 wins against Nick Saban? Gus Malzahn. And those out on the plains could not be more elated to see him depart for a program like UCF. And then they bring in Brian Harsin. Jimbo Fisher beat
Yep.
Nick Saban, an unranked Texas A&M squad, and 2 years later he was fired from his job. So what is the criteria in your terms of being able to say, oh, overrated coach? Because if you're talking about conference championships, okay, well, James Franklin qualifies to not be overrated because he's won a conference championship. Guess who else has won a conference championship? Billy frickin' Napier in the Sun Belt. So he qualifies. Matt Rule qualifies for winning for competing and winning the American Conference Championship. It's your criteria that doesn't add up. If you don't like that James Franklin can't win the big one, so be it. But then name 9 other coaches that are constantly beating top 10 teams. And if you don't like Brian Kelly because of he's an asshole, just say it. It's a bad argument, but it's the only one that you got if you want to talk about overrated. It is sickening. It is beyond frustrating. And more importantly, it's just dumb takes by idiots on the internet who want your attention. Here's your 15 seconds for me to go ahead and lose my shit. I don't really care anymore because unfortunately, you have no idea what you're talking about when you put James Franklin and Brian Kelly with the word overrated in the same sentence. You have no idea what you're talking about. Go ahead and start learning college football 101 and come back to me later.
It's almost like if the expectations aren't as high, like we are, and I don't mean this as a shot, but like nobody would call Brent Key overrated, right? And this isn't a shot at Georgia Tech because I think they're building things the right way, and I'm really kind of excited for where that program's going. But Brent Key's expectations aren't to beat Ohio State, and Brent Key's his personal expectation, but like the expectations around Georgia Tech are not to be 10, 11, 12 game winners every year. And I think they'll get there, and I think he's building the right way. So trying to understand me. Same thing with Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Oh, he's a name that's always on the fringe of these top 15, top 20 lists. He's always right around there. But nobody calls him overrated because he's at Iowa State. Nobody expects them to beat Bama every other year or beat Ohio State or Georgia every other year. And so these coaches, but if we just take a step back and we look at, Brian Kelly versus Brent Key or James Franklin versus Matt Campbell, nobody would ever put one over the other. But do you think that Brian Kelly should be rated behind Brent Key right now? Like, does anybody really believe that? Does anybody really believe that James Franklin should be rated behind Matt Campbell? And so again, I think it's all about within context. Yeah. Has Brian Kelly struggled to win it all and win the big game and, get to the, I guess he did get to the SEC championship his first year, but yeah, has he been
the worst roster he's had on campus there too?
Yeah. Is there some underwhelming that goes on? Sure. But to call somebody overrated because their expectations are higher is a silly part of the argument to me.
I mean, how quickly did people in Florida State start calling Norvell overrated this past season when it was one choice away from being in the college football playoff had Jordan Travis not been injured and had a ridiculous decision not been made? No one would be saying that. But the second things got bad, Norvell's overrated. Last season was a fluke, blah, 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 blah. Come on.
I mean, are you guys seeing right now College Football Home? If you don't, they're a fun Twitter site. They're doing the college football head coaching bracket. Brent Key beat Kalen DeBoer. Like, are we seriously sitting here like, and I love Brent Key, but are we seriously going to sit here and say you would take Brent Key over Kalen DeBoer, who has a winning percentage of 79.2%? Oh, but he lost 4 games last year in his first season, replacing the go to Alabama. I'll tell you, Coach, that we need to start putting on that conversation. And I love him to death, and I know he won't care if I say this. Joey McGuire at Texas Tech. Because honestly, when they're spending the type of money that they are this offseason, with how they believe that they're only a few pieces away and what their schedule is in the Big 12, I think you should be competing at least for a spot in Arlington. And if you can't do that after what type of progress we've seen over the last few years without the resources, maybe the head coaching job is probably something that we have to kind of transpire about. Is this really made for you? Because there were some stinkers last season, I think, out in Lubbock as well for a really solid Red Raider team.
That's what I was going to ask next. This is not the wild card. This is not my question for you, but Cole just gave us one. Tom, who is an overrated head coach in college football?
Wow. Sharon Moore. I'll start there.
I'll buy that. It's early. We'll see what they do this year. I'm excited for our Michigan preview, but I'll buy it.
Listen, like, he got put in a situation at Michigan where they nearly left him holding the bag, and not in a good way. Like, they nearly left him as the fall guy for the Harbaugh stuff. So you probably believed in him enough to give him the job, but not enough to believe in him long term, that sort of situation. It remains to be seen whether or not he can continue to recruit at a high level. Obviously, the money is there. They've continued to recruit well, but it's super early, to your point. So I think you could maybe say that now. It's it'd be the beginning of that argument, but I'm not entirely sold on Sharon Moore just yet. I think Lincoln Riley has to be in this mix because if you're talking about ring chasing, well, he's not there. And it's you're getting Heisman's. That's great. That's like winning the MVP in the NBA, but then doing absolutely nothing in the postseason. Congratulations, Lincoln Riley. And he might be out of USC within the next year or two. So, yeah, that's a tough one. I'm going to say Sharon Moore, but it's super early.
I will say that, and hate to do this to you, buddy, TJ, but I think Mike Norvell's overrated. I never wanted him even in the conversation for the job with the Alabama gig. I had some question marks after how they weren't able to kind of recoup in the transfer portal. I thought they were too portal dependent last year, and ultimately that led to a 2-10 finish with the overall results. Do I think he's a solid coach? Absolutely. Do I think that he could be great at a G5 level like he did when he was at Memphis? Absolutely. But I think if the expectations are at Florida State for you to be in that conversation of 9+ wins every single year, it may be a 2-year stretch, or it may be, one bad season. I don't know. There's not enough visual evidence, but this is a critical year on changing my opinion when it comes to Mike Norvell. Another one that I just want to throw out there that I don't think overrated is the right word, but it's starting to get a little frustrating. It's Luke Fickell. I'm sorry. I love Luke Fickell. He was my favorite hire because of just what he was able to accomplish at the G5 level and how many people were saying waiting in line to go land at a place like Ohio State, or then he was up for the Notre Dame job and then he went to Wisconsin. But at the same time, Wisconsin has completely changed its aura about how they go about things. When I think of Wisconsin football, I think meat, potatoes, son of a bitch that wants to punch you in the mouth, and they don't have that physicality on the ground. They don't have that physicality in the trenches, and it feels like that they're underwhelming at the quarterback position. Once again, I'm not saying that I don't think Danny O'Neal or that Billy Edwards can't be serviceable, But serviceable is not what you let Paul Chryst go for. You let go of Paul Chryst because if you felt like you hit your ceiling and you brought in a coach and you just extended a coach that nobody was targeting at this time for a reason that doesn't add on up. I want to see results, and unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to see them in year 3 for a guy that we had high hopes that could be considered now at a Power 4 program, a top 10 coach in college football by the end of his first season in Madison.
I'll tell you, it's hard for me to disagree with you on the Norvell thing. It's been 5 years, 2 really good years, 3 losing seasons, the most disastrous fall from grace we've ever seen to go from 13-0 down to 2-10. And I think there's a lot of questions. I think my overall take is on Norvell. I think he can build the program enough to consistently compete in the ACC. To win the ACC consistently, no, I don't think I'd say that. But I think he can consistently be one of those top 3 teams, even with the poor recruiting that I think has gone on. I think he can do that. I think Florida State's logo itself will recruit a top 3 class in the ACC almost every single year. Heck, he did it this year with 2 wins. But I don't know that I believe he's the guy that could win national championships. And ultimately, that's the expectation, is to compete for that. So, I don't know that I disagree with you too much there. I mean, now, if they go on a run and win 9+ games for the next 4 years, then I'll probably view that a little bit differently. Yeah. But even as an FSU homer, like I wouldn't say, you go 2-10 and it shocks you, your core, and you do question everything again. Whereas a year ago, I would have thought, he's a top 10 coach in the league or in the country, and we're going to continue to roll. And if they'd just gone 8-4 this year, I'd probably still be like, down year, but they'll be back next year. So it's hard to disagree with that, and I'm a homer. I want them to win every game, but at the same time, call a spade a spade. Like I think that I just don't know that his focus or emphasis on recruiting is high enough. And as much as I hate Mario Cristobal in Miami, and Billy Napier in Florida, they get dudes, and so Florida State's not doing that right now. And we'll see if they turn that around or not. So.
Hey, thanks for watching The Power 2. If you like this type of content, make sure you hit subscribe and check out some of our other videos found here on the channel. Bye.